Hello, and thank you for joining us today. It is often said that the annual exercise of writing a UCAS reference fills many counselors with anxiety and also a sense of trepidation. Sorry, I couldn't resist that bit. We are amongst friends anyway today. The purpose of this webinar, uh, partly and aptly entitled Writing an Effective UCAS Reference, is to provide you with some insights in order to assist you to support your students make an application to our institutions. I am Arvind Vepa from UCL Student Recruitment. Following a presentation by my colleague Jaswir Sur, also from UCL Student Recruitment, there will be an opportunity for you to post your questions to a panel of representatives from the participating institutions today. So please submit any questions that you have using the Q&A function, and we will strive to answer all your questions. Jaswir, the screen is yours.
Hi, Arvind. Thank you for that wonderful introduction. And a big hello and thank you to everyone for attending this session on writing an effective UCAS reference. So my name is Jaswir Sur. As Arvind said, I'm a senior liaison recruitment officer at UCL, and part of my role is to help support students in their applications for applying from international countries. Now, one question I and many of my colleagues often in our roles get asked is, whether we read the UCAS reference that is submitted alongside a student's application. And I can assure you that we absolutely do rely on teachers' reference in helping us have an accurate picture of who the student is and their suitability for the course and all of the additional information that's provided that will help us and assist us with our decision making. So during this session, we'll cover lots of topics in how to approach writing the reference, making the most of predicted grades, and giving you an insight into what we know and what we don't know from your schools and where further clarity can be provided. So just all the sort of practical bits that you need to know. For those of you who have written UCAS references before, will be familiar with everything. And for those of you that are relatively new, we're going to cover some of the practical bits of the UCAS reference. So if we just go on to the next slide. Thank you, Petrova. As all of you will know, the UCAS reference only really makes up one component of a student's application. At UCL, specifically, the teacher's reference is considered holistically with all of the other information that we receive in the application. So the personal statement, the academic grades, the academic background of the student, the predicted grades, and any other assessment components. That might be an interview, that might be an additional test, a portfolio, LMAT, BMAT, lots of different components make up that application. But the purpose of the UCAS reference is really your opportunity to provide your assessment on the student's academic ability and their potential for degree level study, whatever their chosen field might be. So giving an opportunity to have that really comprehensive, clear, realistic evaluation of how they'll perform in their final exams and, their sort of potential in pursuing degree level studies. So that opportunity to colour in a bit more of who the student is, their story, the school that they're from, and all of that information that helps us place their achievements in context. And we'll talk more about this shortly. But essentially the basics are, like with personal statements, formatting isn't included in the UCAS system and should not actually be included as part of the reference. And often, we get asked, is the title of the referee taken into account? So, is a head teacher's reference more valuable than a school teacher, a subject teacher, school counsellor? And, the answer to that question is that it really should be written by somebody that can comment on the applicant's academic ability and their suitability for that programme. It doesn't necessarily need to be signed off by the head of a school or a principal. So a lot of the information on this slide addresses the formatting at a glance, but let's take a closer look at the information that we as an institution are able to ascertain from the application. And just over to the next slide. The information that you can see here is information that we will know and that we'll see from an application form. And some of you from UK schools will be able to see that this is mainly for UK students. And what's noteworthy about this information is that we don't actually get very much information provided about the student, about the context of the school, or even sort of international schools as well. You know, that information regarding the school is really important in setting all of the information that we get in an application into context. So the learning environment that the student's coming from, and all of that information that sets academic achievements into context with regards to their predicted grades and just the sort of teaching environment of the school. But we'll talk more about this shortly in a bit more depth. But if we have a look at the next slide, here's really to sort of spell out what exactly we don't really know at all. It's a lot of information that really sort of paints the picture of who a student is, particularly with their sort of personal background, but also the school as well. And we'll address those shortly and how that can impact the way that we look at a student's application. But just sort of on a personal level, you know, with disabilities, for example, yes, they'll be declared in an application, but we don't know how recently that's been diagnosed. We don't know how it's affected or impacted their learning, their examination grades, or potentially, you know, if they've had something in their home life that has impacted performance. Are there any gaps in education that should be addressed? A lot of countries have compulsory national service. A lot of students may elect to take a gap year, which is absolutely fine. It's just good to sort of tick off and just let us know that this has happened. And, you know, it's important to note as well with extenuating circumstances. We'll go into a lot more detail about this shortly. But if it is identified or if it does occur at a later date after the teacher's reference has been submitted, it should be flagged with the examination board. And a lot of institutions will have their own procedures in place on how they will address these. But we'll go into that a lot more at on a later slide. So if we just go on to the next slide, which is all about structuring your reference. There is no one particular format on what's key for institutions that we'd like to see. You know, like a personal statement, it's individual to the student and it must read well. And, you know, essentially the written reference should address the student's academic suitability for their chosen degree. Now, the school should be introduced. As we've seen on the previous slides, there's limited information that we get to see about the school and a lot of information that we don't get to see about the school. And we'll go into a bit more information on a following slide. But yeah, it's just about sort of making a note of any noteworthy achievements that a student might have, not necessarily in a celebratory way. When we think about all of that information we don't get to see, have they overcome any challenges with their workload or in their home life? And in spite of these challenges, have got really good predicted grades, or has it impacted their performance? You know, for us as an institution, from all of our institutions, we're really looking for that corroboration that students are able to cope with sustained workload at a higher level and that they'll be able to flourish in an academic intensive environment. So, you know, talking about those achievements, it is really nice to know about personal qualities, but for us as institutions, it's a lot more helpful if it relates to their chosen subject. So in talking about the subjects, it's much easier to read that information separated into paragraphs, just sort of sectioning it out into certain areas and giving specific examples that you know the applicant well. For example, saying somebody is good at history isn't necessarily as illustrative as saying so-and-so did really well in this project to do with this topic and they demonstrated these skills. So it's really sort of for us painting that picture and using really targeted examples to sort of show what the student is like as a learner. What are they like in the classroom? Do they have that sort of independent original thought? For science-based subjects or practical subjects, what practical skills have they demonstrated in their learning? One of the key goals as a reference writer is to really sort of highlight to the admissions tutors or the admissions selectors why that pupil is suitable for their chosen course. If applying and how they've actually really demonstrated those skills both inside the classroom and outside the classroom that you know of. For example, pre-pandemic, a language student might have visited their country of choice if they were doing languages to sort of demonstrate that interest. Post-pandemic, it's a little bit harder now to travel as a student. So what have they done? Have they gotten to grips with expanding their literature? Have they done things that are virtual, that are online? How have they brought that interest into their learning environment at school? When discussing subjects, for example, whether that's at A-level or IB or international qualifications, it is really good as well to give prominence to the related subjects that relate to their chosen degree area. So, for example, if a applicant is interested in applying to economics, you might want to focus a little bit more on their mathematics performance. And if we have a look just on the next slide as well, a lot of information is sort of celebrated here in what to include. So giving those examples will show that you know the applicant well, and discussing all those personal qualities and keeping it related to the course is really what we want to see. We do want to know that the students that we will potentially giving offers to have the potential to be engaged members of the communities that they're joining. And, is that evidenced in how they are engaged communities of the schools that they're applying from? Giving that background information is really key. And, reading the personal statements that the students are submitting and sort of providing any background information of unexplained items and anything that's unusual or exceptional about that particular student. And the reference is really the point where teachers are able to back up and corroborate their students' abilities. And, just signing that off with a sort of overall recommendation is a really nice way to kind of round it off with the reference. But, as I said, the reference really is that opportunity to provide a really comprehensive, clear, realistic evaluation about how the student will perform in their final exams. So colouring a bit more in the story of who that student is and setting it in the context of the school that they're from really helps for us to place those achievements that they have in the context. So as I said, there's no strict structure of what the reference should adhere to, but the following is a really good jumping off point for you to build on from. And just sort of going back to introducing your school and the next slide, as I said, there's quite a lot of information that we don't know about your school from the application or the reference. We're not going to know how selective the school is based on what criteria. Is it an academy? Is it a large FE college? What percentage of pupils are on free school meals or pupil premiums? When we're reading all of that wonderful information in the reference, understanding who that student is and setting it in the context of the school and the school information is really important. Understanding the student's performance in the context of any historical data that you might have, has performance improved or dropped for certain subjects across the board in the school, but also individually for them as well. That's really important for us to know. So when we're reading the reference, we'll have a better idea of whether that applicant has done more or less than the usual typical student from that school might have done. So, if they've done an EPQ, what's the percentage of uptake of the EPQ in that school? If they've done independent learning, how typical is that for the students that are in that particular year group? Just to note as well, the pandemic has brought upon a lot of disruption upon all schools and to the provision of teaching in the past 2 years. So how were the students affected by it? How was the school affected by that? And, were students adequately able to access resources? It might be useful to say a line or two on how the pandemic has affected teaching and learning. And I know what you're all thinking now. This is a lot of information to provide in 47 lines of a teacher's reference. And a really good workaround that is providing the URL. So a tiny URL or a bit.ly, which can sit in every sort of reference and link to a school profile on your school website, is a really good sort of workaround to provide that background information to admissions tutors about the learning environment that the student is coming from. And it's a really fantastic way of ticking quite a few boxes in showing the background of the student and the sort of wider challenges, whether that's in a sort of social way or in a home way, that the students are sort of coming from. And so now that we've sort of addressed how you may wish to consider writing the reference and introducing your school, we can move on to another really important part, which is the predicted grades. Predicted grades are hugely important and hugely significant part of any application, because it is what is looked at with regards to understanding whether an applicant is suitable for a programme and whether they meet the academic entry requirements for any particular programme that they're applying for. So as teachers, it is really important to be optimistic about your students' abilities, but also being realistic in what they can actually achieve. For us as institutions, we absolutely trust and depend upon your professional expertise in providing them to us. So for us, it's really helpful if you can tell us how you've made and come to that decision. With A levels, for example, students don't really necessarily take ASs anymore. It's not a sort of mandatory step as part of the A level process. Again, with IBs and international qualifications, there's a myriad of factors that sort of impact predicted grades. So, what has factored into that decision making? Is it mock exams? Is it formative assessments? Is it coursework? And how has your professional judgment come to this conclusion? So, it is really important to be able to explain where students are being predicted, maybe up a grade or two, or maybe down from their academic achievements so far. I know that for us as admissions tutors, or sort of on the university side of things, it can be a little bit puzzling if a student has achieved a grade B, for example, in mathematics, and is sort of predicted a grade A star at A-level maths. So, if there has been signs of improvement, if they have sort of undertaken significant steps to improve their learning, please mention this and how they've done that. And if there is any sort of supplementary evidence that can be provided to substantiate those grades. And so, yeah, we do really factor in your professional judgment into looking at these predicted grades, and providing that really fair and accurate assessment is going to be key for us. And for us to make that decision on whether an applicant is suitable for the academic rigors of studying at higher degree level. And lastly, just sort of to touch on the extenuating circumstances, this is something that may apply to some of your students. If we can just go on the next slide, that'd be fantastic. We are really interested in learning about any extenuating circumstances that have had an effect on the learner. So, being detailed, having specific information about how they've been affected is going to be key. It might be the case that it won't fit into the UCAS reference. And in that case, it is recommended that you get in touch with the universities to sort of underline the best process to provide that information. Some universities will have specific extenuating circumstances forms, and so it is good to get contact with the universities in advance, just to check how they may wish for that information to be provided to them. Of course, not everything can be submitted in advance, and things crop up at later dates unexpectedly, of course. So it is good to let the examination boards know as well if there are any extenuating circumstances, which will be factoring into the final decisions and final grades of any students. Another sort of frequently asked question that has really started cropping up again is regarding COVID-19. And typically this isn't considered an extenuating circumstance because it has impacted all students worldwide. But it is good to know if an applicant has been disproportionately affected. So all of that information that you can provide to us within the school context of how teaching provisions may have been affected. Has there been considerable staff absence due to COVID, or have resources not been able to be provided to all students? That's really good to know within the reference and to be provided within the URL. But in any case, if there's any other information that we should be made immediately aware of, please do let us know. And just some general top tips with the reference. Please do explain anything that's not obvious. If we go to the next slide, we do have to remember that admission selectors are reading hundreds, if not thousands, of applications from applicants all over the world. And they don't know their applicants as well as you do, so clarity is key. If predicted grades aren't consistent, then explain why. So yeah, explaining the unobvious. It is just something to bear in mind, as I know that when it comes to writing applications, especially for students, they can get a bit of tunnel vision, whether that's in their personal statements. And the reference, the teacher's reference, should really be the sort of clarity area in providing all of that information that we need about who that student is. And again, sort of the information in the reference should complement that personal statement. So it is a really useful tip to try to read the personal statement before the reference is written. That can be really useful in corroborating any achievements that the student might have. And just also remembering a little bit more about the individual that you're writing about. I'm all sure that you're writing multiple references for multiple students, so it can be really helpful in just sort of providing a little bit of clarity to you as a teacher in telling a bit more about your student. Just with regards to medicine, if students are applying for medicine, the UCAS reference can absolutely focus on that and not the fifth choice. And just another tip there, the medical admissions pages for the institutions represented today and just sort of wider in the UK as well, they often tend to be super duper transparent with regards to the application process, so if in doubt, please do check any of the departmental pages, but also do check in with the medical admissions teams for the respective universities. And with regards to mitigating factors that might affect performance, as we see, and as I've said before, we really do rely on your judgment as teachers to sort of paint that picture a bit more about the applicant. And just sort of linked to that as well, if you are mentioning anything that's sensitive, personal information, or mentioning a student's health issue, do ensure that you've got permission to share this with us. And yeah, that's just something to bear in mind. And lastly, this little information on extracurricular achievements and the sort of personality skills. A really good question, and a really good sort of question I always pose to students when they're writing their personal statements is, how am I adding value in telling an admissions selector this particular thing? And the sort of same can be applied to the teacher's reference. So when we look at sort of examples, as said before, try to keep the examples specific to the subject and to the qualities that are needed to perform in that subject. The reference is really there for you to provide your professional judgment on the student's academic ability and their potential for degree level study in whatever their chosen field might be. And for really competitive programs, it can be the case that every word counts, particularly in the teacher's reference as well. And just to conclude, this is a really sort of fantastic opportunity for you guys to sort of brush up on the UCAS reference and, just to pose your questions to the panelists here today. And I'd like to thank everyone for listening to me present today, and I will pass on to my colleague Arvind for the next portion of this session. Thank you very much.
Thank you for that fantastic presentation, Jaswir. I'm sure our attendees have found that useful. We are very fortunate that we have a wonderful panel of colleagues from the institutions represented here today. And before we go on to take the questions and open up for I know some of the questions have already come in, but we'll pose them to the panel. I'd like to request our colleagues to briefly introduce themselves, probably 15 seconds each, the name, the institution they represent, and what they do. And if we can start with with Imperial College, please.
Hello. Hi, my name's Stephanie Gomez. I'm the Faculty Admissions Manager for Natural Sciences. So hello.
Great. Thank you, Stephanie. Kings.
Hi there, my name is Jake. I'm the Head of Undergraduate Admissions here at King's, so look after everything that comes through the undergraduate. If you have very specific questions I might not know, but I'll be able to find out for you.
Great, thank you, Jake. LSE.
Hello, my name's Alex. I'm the Undergraduate Admissions Manager at LSE.
Good to see you, Alex. SOAS.
Hi, I'm Kim, Head of Student Recruitment. You will have heard from me before, but nice to see everybody again.
and UCL.
Hello, everyone. I'm Neil Green, Head of International Student Recruitment. And I'm afraid our Head of Undergraduate Admissions, who was going to be here today, is unwell. So I'll help out as best I can.
Great. Thank you, Neil. So fantastic. So we've had some questions come in, and I know colleagues have been quite active in the background answering a few, and there's some that have come up as well. And we've requested counselors to post their questions a little ahead of the webinar today. So probably the first question that we would love to get on is, in your opinion, who would be the best choice to write the school reference? Would you prefer it from the counselor or from the subject teacher? Alex, if we can start with you.
I think from our perspective, we would like it from the person that knows the student the best. So whoever that actually is, that has interacted with the student, that's got to know them over their time at the school or college, that's the person we want to write the reference, because they can give us that individual expert knowledge, expert assessment of the student, not just general terms, but, how do they place in their cohort, in the school, in all the years of your teaching experience. So absolutely the person that knows the student best is the best person to write the reference.
Wonderful. Thank you. Kim?
Yeah, I'd say again the same thing, the person that knows the student the best, but also to make sure that person is aware what the student is applying for, because they can write the best reference if they know why they're applying to a program and what they're applying for, and also possibly some of the institutions they're applying to.
Okay. Jake, would you concur?
Concur. Yeah, agree with my colleagues.
Yeah. Okay, so I guess Imperial UCL, it's almost the same, or it is the same answer. So we'll crack on with the next one. One of the questions that we had come in earlier was, other than the UCAS application form, if a referee wishes to submit some additional information or send in the reference, how best should they go about that? Stephanie, if we start with you.
Yes, so my answer would be specific to Imperial. But so for us, if there's any additional information, ideally if it could come in as soon as possible, and it be sent to the relevant admissions team. We do have a general inquiries email address if the school or the teacher doesn't know which department the course comes under. Unfortunately, we do have a few with similar names, so that is completely understandable. And then if the information could please have the student's full name and UCAS number, because we get sometimes information without any UCAS numbers, and then the name that is the school is referring to the student is not the same that's on the UCAS application form. So ideally the full name and the UCAS number provided in the information. So yes, that's for us.
Okay, Jake.
Very similar. We have a contact center where if you have any particular questions, if it's a particular process, so extenuating circumstances, or you have questions about widening participation and things like that, we have particular processes online. Best just to jump into Google or search engine of choice, type KCL or one of the institutions here, and then the next part of your question often will pop up. Certainly for King's, using Google is much better than using our internal search box. It's okay, but Google often gets you the result much quicker.
I'm not sure you should have revealed that secret, but anyway, thanks for sharing that. But I assume it will be similar for the other institutions here today. If you have any correspondence, any further correspondence pertaining to a student, the general rule of thumb is mention their full name and the UCAS number in the subject box of the email and send in the email as soon as possible rather than delay it. Excellent. We have a question here that's come up. The UCAS form has a section for predicted grades. Should the counselors still add the predicted grades again into the reference? And also, if they want to elaborate a bit more about some of the challenges or obstacles faced by a student, how do they go about doing that? Because the predicted grades, from what I recall, is fairly limited. So would you recommend that they put that in the reference section? Neil, if we go with you.
Yeah, they don't have to explicitly reference the predicted grade. I'm going to say reference twice here. Reference the predicted grades in the reference when they write it, because there is space on the UCAS form when the students complete the form and complete the qualifications they're taking and then select pending, that will automatically allow for a predicted grade to be attributed to that particular subject and qualification. It could be the case that they're unable to find a particular qualification that they're taking when they complete that apply section of the form, in which case we would need it spelt out in the reference longhand. But it's not necessary for the majority of qualifications. For the additional information, yeah, absolutely, that has to come in the reference, because that really is the opportunity to provide some of that information about maybe extenuating circumstances, mitigating factors, or some predictions which might be slightly out of kilter with the rest of the reference.
Kim, would you like to add anything to that?
Yeah, I'd just say that, yeah, adding context to the predicted grades is super helpful for us. And I think that's what we look to the reference for from counsellors or from teachers. And that's what we look at the personal statement for when it comes in from a student. So I think anything that's kind of mitigating circumstances or anything that needs like a little bit more of explanation, if both the counsellor or teacher can do that in the reference and then the student also does that in the personal statement, I think it's super helpful. And I think there is like this worry that if we add this in, would it negatively impact the student rather than positively impact the student? But that's definitely not the case for most universities. In fact, it just helps us to understand the student a bit more.
Great, thank you, Kim. And I think I assume the others would also have something similar in terms of the practices. We'll just move on with the next question. And Alex, if we could go to you for this question. Is it helpful to include statements such as the top 5% of the year group or the best student we've had for several years in the reference? Or do you prefer very specific achievements, say like winning prizes, or participating in the Olympiad and so forth?
So my answer would be, why not both? They're both helpful. They both provide context. They both allow us to, the academic selector, to put that student into context in terms of their cohort that they're studying in, and indeed across all of the other applicants that year. So absolutely, it's really helpful to get those kind of insights where a student is maybe the best student in the year or the best student you've taught for a few years, but also prizes, awards, kind of extra super curricular activity. All of those things are really, really helpful. So absolutely, both is the answer.
Stephanie, if we could request you to comment on this.
I would say the same thing. It depends on, because there's a limited word count, so obviously more specific information if you're running out of words, but both sets of information is helpful and gives us context.
Great, thank you. I think we'll move on to the next one. And Jake, if I could come to you. The international A-levels are modular based. So is there a difference in how you evaluate this versus the UK A-levels?
We would, in our end, look at just the final grade, pretty much is how we would look at it. If there was truly a borderline case between two individuals, which may come up once in a blue moon, maybe we'd look into that granular detail, but really it's all about that raw value right at the end. The A and the A star would be the key for us. Okay,
Kim, I assume it's the same at SOAS, and probably I see Alex and I see the others nodding as well. So I think that's a quick answer to go. Thanks, Jake. And we have a question from a counselor, possibly at an American school, and it's a very interesting one. So we'll probably, Neil, I'll start with you and then take it around the table. So speaking of the predicted grades for the American schools, what grades do you want to see in the predicted scores? Are you looking at the classroom grades that the school offers? Are you looking at the predicted scores on the AP exams? And if a school does not offer AP in most subjects, what grade would you like to see in the predicted section?
Yeah, I think the place to start with this is considering the entry requirements of the different institutions and programs that the student in question wants to apply for. We'll have, to a degree, varying entry requirements for students coming from the US. A lot of us will accept APs. Some of us will look at things like high school diploma and SAT tests and ACTs. So I think the place to start is what is necessary from each of those programs to gain an offer of admission for that student, and then make sure that you are putting in the predicted grades for each of those different qualifications or types of qualification. On the question of the APs, if you've got a student who is applying to 5 programs that, for example, will only accept APs, and APs are not being offered, I think very, very seriously about having a conversation with the student about if they've got a realistic opportunity of being admitted. Dropping an email, getting in touch with the universities in question just to ask what flexibility there might be. But I think that's the place to start. Look at what is required and published as the entry requirements for students from your particular country, in this case, the US, and start from there.
Okay, thank you. Jake?
Pretty much stole the answer I would have given. The only thing I would add on to there is if you cannot study APs because of something completely outside of your something that's not due to you, there's outside forces that have made it so your school cannot offer them for that particular year, that'd be something to flag to us potentially in advance, because we can often look at being more holistic with that individual. But that's only if it's truly out of your hands. If it's more you choose not to offer them, then we wouldn't necessarily be able to entertain that. But if something catastrophic has happened to block it, then we would look into working with you and your applicants to do the best that we can in that scenario.
Great, thank you. Stephanie, I assume it's pretty much the same at Imperial?
Yeah. Oh, I could, for Imperial, we're a little bit more specific. So we actually don't take ACTs or the SATs. So we look normally at the AP tests. And so we, again, as Neil said, the first place of a point of call is to check the university's website, look at the entry requirements, and feel free to contact the admissions team if there's any doubts or any questions. And we really want the student to make a application that's best for them, to the university that's best for them. So if they're not taking the right requirements, maybe it isn't the best choice to make the application. But any doubt, please contact the admissions team. We're happy to help however we can.
Great. Alex, any specific requirements at LSE?
LSE, we look at APs, we look at the high school diploma, we don't look at SATs or ACT scores. So for us, that's what we would be interested in. I think Jag's point about the curriculum is a really good one, and it applies not just to APs, but across the board. If there is a reason, or if you can tell us about the reasons certain subjects are not offered, so that we know that it's the student that, you know, they haven't chosen not to take that subject, it's just not available to them, that's really helpful for us as well.
And Kim?
Yeah, just to add that if they are taking any APs outside of the school as well, and so the counsellor is unable to add in the predicted grades for that because they're not doing it through the school, they're doing it independently, just to let us know of that. And then we know if we have to source separate predicted grades for those APs for that student, because a lot of students in the US might take certain community college courses or APs at different institutions, or possibly be even doing home study for some of those.
Great, thank you. Now the next one again reverts back to the provision or submission of a URL link to the school profile. I think this counselor probably had some mixed experience with the applications in the past. They just want to get some surety that if they were to type in the tiny URL or a bit.ly shorter version of the URL, is this something that the admission selectors would actually type out into the browser for them to access the profile of the school? Or should they just mention as much as possible, provide as much information as possible in the recommendation, thereby using up some very valuable real estate on the form? If we could start with Kim.
Yeah, it might be a little bit different at SOAS than it is to some other universities. I'm just thinking of the sheer number of applications that are being received at some of the institutions here. But we actually quite like it if either the school or the student has the opportunity to send us in an email after they've made their UCAS application with a profile for their school, or even it could be a website link for that. And our admissions team do look at that. I mean, to be honest with you, particularly I'm thinking for US students, we tend to go out to our US students for more more detail anyway, because we realise what they can put in the UCAS form is not always an extensive view of them, particularly when we're looking at things like GPAs and for certain subject areas. So we're happy for that to be sent through email, but if it is included, our team are likely to look at it.
Great, thank you. Alex?
I would say for LSE, it's absolutely fine both ways. So we have an electronic processing of our applications. So the admission selector can click on the link, they can get it up in another window, and it's absolutely fine. It's really easy. But if that's not, suitable, then by all means use some of the real estate in the reference to provide that information. It really is to the school's preference.
Right, thank you. Jake?
So I'm going to dissent slightly. We're a little bit more light touch with our use of the references. So if you were to include that link, we may or may not utilize it. I cannot guarantee that we would. We do use it as part of our holistic assessment, but the reference does not play as key a component of our sort of process or rubric, I would say.
Great, and I'm just checking. Looks like we've lost Stephanie. Or Stephanie, if you're on the call, can you just share what Imperial is looking? I think we've lost Stephanie, but we'll bounce back. We'll get back to her. She's probably got an IT glitch. But let's crack on with the next question. And again, this is continuing with the school profiles and the short URL. And the counselor here has mentioned that some students who applied earlier in the cycle, say in December, and in January had different profiles. Now for the earlier applicants, of course, the version, the URL was linking to the older version. And to the more recent ones, of course, it was the updated profile. In such a scenario, do you think it is prudent for the counselors to actually reach out to the individual admissions officers and send an updated profile by PDF? Is that something that you'd be looking for? Jake, if we could start with you.
We wouldn't necessarily engage with the URLs, but I can imagine for my colleagues that it would be useful for them to update us and keep us abreast of any changes that may happen, not just for the school profile, but for the applicant in general. So yes, I could see it being useful.
Hi, Stephanie, welcome back. Were you able to catch the question?
Sorry, no, my internet cut out, and so I've missed some of the question. So it's about a URL.
This is about the URL. So for a student, say, who applied earlier in the cycle, the link would have led to an older profile, and if the profile was updated later in the cycle, then the students who applied later would have a link to the most recent profile. In such an instance, would the admission selectors at Imperial like to receive an updated profile in the form of a PDF?
It depends on the information involved. I mean, I think from what I'm expecting, like the key bits of information, so for UK universities, if they are providing like further maths, or if they're not providing further maths, those are the kind of key pieces of information that's really helpful. So if the information provides is really key to the student's application, then yes, please send us anything they feel is going to be helpful. But due to the large volume of applications that we receive, it's only if the information is definitely necessary.
And any additions, anything else? Alex, would you like to comment on that?
I mean, it's very the same, much the same at LSE. Updated recent information is much more valuable than something that's out of date. So please, yeah, send us the most up-to-date information.
And Kim, I suspect you're also in the same boat, updated. Now, following on from this question, what is your policy on accepting updated predicted scores? And I think this is a very interesting question, and we'll get each of you to come in with your institutional policy. So if we start with Kim.
Yeah, from our side, we don't mind receiving an update on predicted scores, because we do realise that depending on where students are studying, particularly international students, sometimes at the point that they would be doing kind of their version of a mock exam or their version of an end of semester might not match with when we're asking them to submit the applications in, particularly because obviously international students can submit after the January deadline, but we try to promote them actually putting it in for the January deadline. So with that in mind, we will accept it SOAS, but obviously I do realise that with maybe some of the others, there's a lot of applications that people are looking.
Great, thank you. Jake?
As a rule, perhaps not. We'd want a very robust rationale as to why there has been a change. We'd also ask that it's early as possible in the cycle. If a rejection has already been made and it's months after the fact, then there's very little we could do in that scenario. So it's much more about letting us know ASAP and giving us a really robust rationale as to why. Yeah.
Great, thank you. Neil?
Yeah, I think as with Jake, if a rejection has already been made, then I think that's the end of it pretty much. As for those applications that haven't received an offer, I think that we wouldn't be too keen, but I would have to double check with our admissions team, to be quite honest with you. And I'm happy to be contacted. I'll put my details in the chat.
Great, thank you. Alex?
Very much the same as King's. If it's after the point of decision, then there isn't much that we're going to be able to do. If it's before a decision has been made, then we would want to know why the predicted grades have changed. If there's been a genuine administrative error, that's fine. If it's been, there's been some change in the predictions due to academic, kind of upward trajectory, again, fine. But we would want to know why. We would not just accept it, without some explanation.
Right, thank you. Stephanie?
So yes, same as Alex and Jake. We would like the information as soon as possible. Just also to please put the student's full name, UCAS number in the information. If the information come from the school's official email address, if that's possible, if they have an official email address. But unfortunately, if the rejection has already been made based on the information, there's nothing much we can do unless it's an administrative error, and we'll have we'll take steps to make sure that there's a fair and transparent application process. And again, we would like the reason why there's a change in predicted grades, especially if it's dramatic, say maybe from a C to an A star. We would like some background information. Also, we would like we normally have stick to the UCAS deadline of whatever they've changed it to now, which is I think the last Wednesday in January. So ideally, all information about necessary information by that date, if possible.
Great, thank you. We have a question about the foundation year program, or the foundation or the university preparatory program. Is that something your offices handle, or do you have a separate office which handles it? If I could maybe ask Jake, do you have a separate office that deals with it?
I was on mute. Our International Foundation year, we offer that in our own office, so it's all included. So they sit practically next to the undergraduate.
I think the reason I was going with that question is we do have a query about from a counselor. So for the students with the national degrees, which probably aren't accepted, or maybe are accepted but still want to, these students wish to do a foundation year, would you like to see the results of the national admissions tests as well as a part of the application to the foundation program? Jake, if I come back to you and then I'll go to the others.
That's quite specific, and I'm going to give a very vague answer to that. Whenever anybody makes an application to one of our courses, we'd ask for a full kind of educational background. So all of the tests and examinations they've done previously, if they could be provided to allow us to kind of make a robust and fair assessment of their application. Always check our website for our entry requirements, bits and bobs for applying as well.
Alex, I assume it's probably the same.
Well, we don't have a foundation year, so it doesn't apply to us.
Thank you. Stephanie?
We don't offer a foundation year. We do accept foundation courses, and the ones that we do accept are listed on our website under the entry requirements, but we don't offer one, unfortunately.
Great, thank you. Kim?
Yeah, we would just say we want a full background of a student in order to assess them for either our entry into our degree programs or our foundation year. We do actually offer both foundation years for non-English speakers and also a foundation year for UK-based students or English speakers as well. So, and sometimes the students are applying directly into that program. Sometimes the students are applying into our other programs, and maybe we don't feel that they meet the requirements of the program, and that the foundation program will actually help them moving forward. But yeah, anything we can know about their previous studies is going to help us to assess, you know, whether that foundation program is the right one for them.
Neil?
Yes, UCL does offer foundation, but it's not, the application is not made by UCAS. There's a separate application form for foundation programs at UCL. And as Kim said, yeah, it's always useful for us to hear about all qualifications that applicants have got. So as much information as you can provide.
Great, thank you. Oh, okay, we're coming to about 5 minutes.
Just apologies to jump in.
Go ahead, Jake.
Just to clarify, it's our international foundation program. We don't have a traditional sort of foundation year to a course. My answer was reference to the foundation program.
Great, thank you. I think the bottom line here, if we were to sum up, is that they need to check and provide as much of information as possible so that the admission selectors can make an informed judgment there. Terrific. This is a slightly tricky offbeat question, one that has come up in the past, and I'm going to pose that to all of you, and I'm sorry for probably setting the cat amongst the pigeons here, but there are occasions where students do apply outside of the school. They're registered at the school, but they may come through an external center or an agency who's registered as a UCAS center. In such instances, when students submit these applications and it's the external center that provides the predicted scores and the reference, is there any way you are able to pick that out when the applications come in? And secondly, is there a difference in the way you would probably assess that? Would you put that under what shall we say, for convenience, enhanced scrutiny, since it's from a non-school source? Alex, if I were to start with you.
Yes, so we would pick that up. We look very carefully at the reference and who it's from, the email address, and we make sure that it's from the school or the college. If it turns out that it's not come from the school, we would contact the school, because we would want a reference from the school and we would want the predicted grades from the school. So the answer is yes, we would look at it more carefully and we would follow up directly with the school.
Fantastic. Kim?
Yeah, again, we'd follow up on why it hadn't come from the school, and ideally we would want it to come through the school.
Stephanie?
So yes, we do check. So from my understanding, so there's different elements. So there is, if a application has not come from application source A, we do pay a little bit more closer attention to it. In terms of the reference, we would look at the email addresses, see where it's come from, and we are trying to be a little bit more flexible during COVID times. So in terms of where the reference is coming from, so as long as it looks appropriate, it's got referring to the right students and things like that, we're trying to be a little bit more flexible. But before COVID, yes, we would have, as Alex has said, would want a reference from the school email address, but we're trying to do our best to accommodate our students during this period. So things might change. If things improve, we might go back to our old processes in a future cycle.
Great. Neil?
Yeah, I would have thought we would be in line with what Alex has said about following up for any references that are not coming from the school. However, I do know that we are receiving huge volumes of applications at the moment, so I would want to confirm with our admissions office first of all before giving a definitive answer. Again, anyone is welcome to contact me according to the email I've put into the chat, and I'll follow up.
Great, thank you. Jake?
Very similar to Alex, where we can, if there's a very good reason, I mean exceptional reason again, that we cannot be provided by the school, we would entertain it, but often you'd need that robust rationale again to really explain to us why we can't get it. Things like the school no longer exists or something like that would be very valid. Yeah, those sort of things.
Fantastic. I think that literally brings us on the dot to 2 o'clock. And I think Petrova behind the scenes would be happy to see that we're going to finish on time. So I just want to thank all of you for coming in, sharing your views and thoughts. And also a big thanks to Jasway for the presentation. And thanks to all the counselors who've joined us today. So take care and stay safe. Thank you. Bye-bye.